This is John Drabinski, and you're listening to the Black Studies Podcast, a series of conversations examining the history of the field. Our conversations engage with a wide range of activists and scholars, senior figures in the field, graduate students, and everyone in between, culture workers and political organizers, in order to explore the cultural and political meaning of Black studies as an area of inquiry and its critical methods. Today's conversation is with Kimberly Blockett, who teaches in the Department of Africana Studies at University of Delaware. Along with a number of scholarly articles in prominent journals, she has published 2 books, Race, Religion, and Rebellion in the 19th Century Travels of Zilpha Elaw, Black Woman Evangelist from 2023, and a scholarly edition of Memoirs of the Life, Religious Experience, Ministerial Travels, and Labors of Mrs. Zilpha Elaw, an American female of color from 2021. In this conversation, we discuss the importance of recovering lost voices in a multidisciplinary approach to history, the place of religion in Black study, and the exciting, productive, and imaginative messiness of Black studies research. And Kim, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm all right. We were talking before I pressed record. We're both in the wind down to the beginning of the semester mode. So, in a combination of denial and also savoring every free moment before chaos ensues of the first weeks.
Indeed.
But I'm really happy we found time to talk. I'm really interested to hear what you have to say about the field of Black studies, your imagination of the place of your research in it, how you think about the field, and all of these sorts of things. And so thank you in advance for making time and for your thoughtfulness in this conversation. Welcome to the Black Studies Podcast.
Thank you for having me. And thanks so much for the important work that you guys are doing. I'm thrilled to be in conversation with such amazing scholars.
I know we've this project started out. I think Ashley and I thought it was going to be like a couple dozen of our friends, if we have that many friends, and it's really turned into like a living archive of the field of thinking about its past and presence. And your voice is going to be a really important one to have on it. So I really appreciate that. And we'll have a chance, of course, talk a little bit about your research and how you envision the field. But before we get to that, I wanted to ask you, what is it that drew you to Black studies? What is it that drew you to the study of Black life? And always for me, the companion piece to that is what sustains you and keeps you connected to this kind of work?
Well, what drew me to it, I guess, was just what drew me to just the field of literary studies and academia in general. It started with my first African American literature course. And I was just overwhelmed, because I think it was my first real introduction other than the, traditional things that we do in elementary school and Langston Hughes and blah, blah, blah. And it just sort of set me on a journey that I was just interested in understanding all that I could about Black people and the way that we represent ourselves, particularly artistically.
Yeah. So did you feel like that, that's interesting. You said just felt overwhelmed, that was I love that way of talking about that as a transition moment. I mean, for you, was it sort of like a continuity with something from your sort of childhood through high school, or was it really just like this new world sort of opened up? I think I'm asking because people have often such different ways of encountering that first course in college when they study something about Black life, whether it's art or intro to Black studies or Black literature, where it's either sort of connects all these things from their past or is really just like this revelation of whole new possibilities.
It was a little bit of both. I mean, I was really fortunate that I finished my K through 12 education. The last had been predominantly white, except for a very happy accident. I finished in the last 3 years of it, so sixth, 7th, and 8th grade, in a Catholic school run by the Order of the Oblate Sisters, which is a Black Catholic order.
Oh, okay.
And ended up there because I had been kicked out of the white school not kicked out, but my mom was having difficulty paying the tuition, and she asked for, like, a couple of extra weeks when the school year started, and they wouldn't give it to her. And she was devastated, and someone told her, "Well, try, a presentation." And she went there. She knew nothing about it, and, you know, saw that the principal was a Black nun who just said, "Just bring her." And my mom was trying to talk about the financial, and the woman was like, "Just bring her.
Amazing.
School has started. Get her here," you know?
What a thing to say. I love that.
It was amazing. And if that hadn't happened, I wouldn't have had gosh, I don't know where I would be today. So, the education was so amazing that it sparked my love of English, of learning language,
Mm.
of analyzing sentences, and it was a Black school, and it was blackety black. So, in the sense that we had to memorize Bible verses every day and recite them because they were keen on making sure that we could do oral presentation. But we also had to sing the Black National Anthem. So every morning, that's how we started our day.
Hmm.
And I mean, the full Black National Anthem. And we needed to, know it.
All right.
So it was a very interesting education for those really foundational years. And then I had a very circular trajectory through college. I graduated early because I was double promoted, and I was way too emotionally immature. So my first few years at college, I think I must have failed out of like 3 colleges or something, and then I gave up and went and did life, and then thought, "Oh, poverty isn't cute," and then decided to
Poverty isn't cute.
it's not cute. I think I need to finish my education. It's certainly not cute when you have a child and husband and a house and all of these things. So, then again, happy accident. I ended up at a historically Black community college and had this amazing professor. And one of the first classes I took when I was just sort of like, "Oh, I'm just going to take a class or two and see if I'm ready to do this," was his African American literature class. And it literally changed the trajectory of my life.
I love that. First of all, I always in these episodes, there are always these moments where I'm like, everything is about this episode is worth it for particular phrasing or insight or whatever. I think poverty isn't cute. It's going to be one of those for this one. It really isn't. Having adjuncted for 1 year, I know this is 1 year, but in Memphis, Tennessee, it was a moment where I was like, yeah, I'm looking sleek and thin, but not for good reasons.
Right.
So,
Right.
but what you're saying there, I mean, the graciousness of this nun, this president of just get her to school, but also the stumbling into this literature class is just a reminder for me. And the semester's about to begin. I'm a little resentful. I don't really feel like teaching. So I actually personally really appreciate that reminder that you just never know what educational encounter is just going to be a massive life shift for people at every level. In this case, it sounds like sort of gathering so much from the past, and then obviously what it projects for your future is, you're a professor now. So
Absolutely. And I was resistant the entire way. And so what we do as educators is absolutely profound and transformative. And like you, it's easy to get annoyed and it's like, and you forget. And, also oftentimes we don't see it, right?
mm-hmm.
We do have those special students who keep us going, right? Who understand what is happening in the moment. But for the most part, we're just planting seeds, and we don't see exactly how what we're doing in the classroom might really transition or change something for somebody. Most of the time we don't see it. So yeah, sometimes I do have to remind myself as well that this is incredibly important work. Yeah.
Yeah, I've had those moments where somehow run into a student somewhere and they're like, "Hey, I was in such and such a class," and they're a lawyer or teach a high school teacher or whatever, and then just the most random thing can make a difference. I mean, that was I'm not going to turn this into the John Drabinski guest podcast, but I did have like a moment of complete life change with the professor, and I remember him mentioning it to him many, many years later, and he was like, "What?" I was like, "No, really, you said this. You're the first person who ever told me that I was smart." And that made a big difference. He was like, "Oh, okay." So,
That's so funny, John, because I had the exact same experience with one of my professors. I said, "You were the first person who told me I was smart," and that made all the difference. And, I just got this sort of blank look like, "Okay."
yeah.
I'm glad it did. Clearly, they didn't remember it because why would they, right?
I'll put his name out there. Professor Patrick Burke passed away a month and a half ago. So rest in peace, Professor Burke. These are great moments.
These are
Like I
great
said,
moments.
it's good to know, like at this, be reminded of it as we put our syllabi together and I have to make printers work and set up Canvas or
Right.
Blackboard or whatever. So
All of that. And I think I learned between the Black, uh, elementary school, the sixth or eighth grade school, and then the community college experience, where I'll put his name out there. My very first significant mentor, Fred Salzman, may he rest in peace, um, who not only introduced me to African American literature, because I took every class I could with him, but also I was studying to be a chemical engineering major. So
oh, really?
he also shifted me to literary studies, right? Which again changed the trajectory of my life. And I was very resistant. And also, I didn't want to do that because I was just like, what the heck do I do with an English major? Like, how do I get a job? Because remember, I was going to make money, right? I was trying to get
Yeah.
myself out of poverty. And this sort of, I never thought that I would actually enjoy learning. And then voluntarily decide to be in school longer than 4 years because I wanted to study this thing called Black Literary Studies. So
I love that. And it also, this is, I will ask you another question, I promise. But there's an incredible coincidence here, which is that the episode that I recorded just before this one, a couple days ago, and so will come out around the same week as yours, was with somebody also named Kimberly, who was also a chemical engineering major in college and is now Africana Studies professor. So I don't know what's going on in 2026 with the podcast, but apparently chemical engineering to Black studies is a quiet pipeline for people named Kimberly. So
it's a thing.
it is. Two people make it a thing, I think.
That's right.
Well, let me ask you about Black studies and how you imagine what that portrait of the field is for you that you work with. And I like to ask this question in the context of its founding, which was, had a tension built into it, right? It had, on the one hand, students demanding that there be a place on campus to study Black life, that the Black intellectual tradition, expressive tradition, had no real home in any discipline. And so Black studies was going to be that place where Black life could be represented, studied. And I think that lives today in this sort of core element of Black studies, which is the study of the tradition. But of course, the founding of Black studies was also a moment where the radicalization of Black liberation struggle had really contested, if not outright gotten rid of those boundaries between classrooms and communities, between books and ideas and prescriptive political action. And I think that lives today in this part of Black studies that's committed to a certain kind of political view of liberation and kind of commitment to a politics. And I think there's a tension there between intellectual life and political or community, anchoring of Black studies. And so sort of in that context, I'm interested to hear how you think about Black studies. What's that portrait you work with?
Well, I think for me, even before I knew what Black Studies was, but I was doing it, right?
Yeah.
Those two things were never in tension or in contrast. And they never should be. I know that they are, right? I acknowledge that. But in the way that we think about, theorize, and practice Black studies, these things should never be mutually exclusive, right? So the way that I learned how to think about Black experience writ large, throughout my education, and then as I, began to do my own research, um, has always been fundamentally grounded in what what it has meant to live life as a Black woman, in, a poor area, coming from a poor area of Detroit, Michigan. And that, my family, right, being impoverished for generations and not being, what was I, 3 generations from enslavement. So my great-grandfather on my paternal side, was born enslaved, and then we had 2 generations of sharecropping. So, eh, and the whole project for me, as I said, I started out going to school, to make money, right? The whole project of what I do and how I do it has been, as a scholar, has been completely enmeshed in what does this mean for Black people,
Hmm.
right? So it's just never been one or the other. And I'm just so fortunate to be, now in a department that is very mission focused, mission driven is one of the reasons I was attracted to it. And doing really high level, scholarship and research, but also holding at the same time, the importance of this work doesn't mean all that much if it only sits in the classroom,
Hmm.
right? So as you and I talked about, what happens in that classroom is profound, right? So I'm not diminishing that, but what happens beyond that, right? And so the way that I learned and the way that I practiced and the way that I administrate now is all about what we do in the classroom, what we do in the private scholarly space, and how does that translate to making a difference in the lived lives of Black people around us.
Yeah, and as we were talking about before, also the way that things that happen in the classroom have such a long life that's
Mhm.
unanticipated. Um, it's one of those things that always strikes me actually as an important point in this, you know, often articulated and often very real tension between a politics and the work of study. But when we think about how much of the classroom lives outside the classroom when it's successful, and I always like to point out, like, I live in the world too. I don't live in that
Right,
classroom. I live in a neighborhood and
right.
I go to the grocery store and I go to restaurants and I vote and, I'm a full, I actually do live outside my office. Students who see me every once in a while are a little shocked that I go to the grocery store. But
Right, right.
I like that part. But no, that's I love that the Delaware department is mission driven. I think that's so important as a way of thinking about that continuity between the origins of Black studies and Black studies today. It's something I think we all who are in Black studies departments have to remind ourselves of the need for a really articulated mission.
Absolutely. And we're very focused on it. And there isn't one person in my department, who isn't an amazing scholar. And at the same time, and because of that, is also doing some level of public scholarship, and community engagement. So it's both at the individual level and also the department level.
I love that at the same time and because of. That's a great turn of phrase there. Let me ask you a little bit then about your work and in relation to the field of Black studies. Your work is, engaged with literary history, history of religion, writing and thinking about key figures and the tradition. And so, I think this mix has such an important role to play and generates such important insights for the field of Black studies. And so I'm interested to hear you talk a little bit about how you think your research and your writing relates to the past of Black studies, or where it fits, but also what sorts of new horizons does it open up? What sort of boundaries do you see it pushing for the field?
Um, One of the things that was unexpected for me is that I started out studying 20th century modernism in grad school. And by the time I was finished, I was deeply invested in 19th century, especially life writing. And all of the work that I had to do, essentially training myself as a historian, so that I could understand what was happening in the literature in
Mm.
all genres, um, led me to doing recovery work, and which is the project I've been working on for a long time. And so that is deeply connected to some of the foundings of the field, right? Because this is a relatively new field, and it was built around, recovering the Black past, right? Which wasn't just immediately accessible to us. It wasn't, and especially, those of us who are older in the field and the people who came before us, it wasn't available to us in our basic education for the most part. So it needed recovery, right? All the people, all the things, all the facts, all the figures, everything needed recovery.
Uh-huh,
Everything had to be
uh-huh.
dug up. And so that's what I do. And so I feel very invested in sort of where the field started, and then where it is now, and where it's going. And in terms of, you know, what does it hold for the future? I think that's one of the most important things that Black Studies does and has done for the world. I think we've set an excellent example for how to do this work. And what's happening now is really fascinating ways of thinking about what it means to engage with the archives, and what does it mean to engage with, the ethics of bringing up people's experiences that were obscure and sometimes purposefully buried. What is our responsibility, right? Both to the things that we are recovering and discovering about ourselves, and then how can we do it differently? In other words, in a way that is, we're past the point of just finding things just to find them. And that was an important moment, right? That needed to be done. But now it's sort of thinking about, well, how do we do this work and do it better and ethically, and what is its afterlife?
Mm-hmm.
So the work now that Black scholars are doing in archival studies and cultural geography, it's really fascinating and amazing. And various scholars are just coming up with really productive methodologies for doing this kind of work in a more expansive way. And so I think that's really important for the field to continue to refine and define its methodologies in ways that make sense for where we are now.
I love that. Thank you. That distinction between sort of the first and second phases, if I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but of recovery work, of just like getting the facts, getting the texts, and then that second phase of really thinking hard about how to care for it, right, and how to inherit it, and all those ethical questions. That's so interesting. That was so thoughtfully put. Thank you. That in terms of content that will stick with me from this conversation. I really love that. So thank you. I'm really happy to have that on the episode as part of the series. I think, for any of us who, it's not my particular work, but there are so many people doing this kind of work, to be thinking about it in those terms, I think is so interesting, and it's a great way to think about to articulate a relationship to the past and the future of Black studies. It's like the past, it's like this recovery work, but the new questions that emerge once we begin to handle what's been recovered. I love that. Thank you. And so that, this is, I mean, in some ways, this is a variation on that question. But, I want to ask you a little bit then about your educational background and work in Black studies and research. Your doctorate was in English. You talked about this, literature being the pivotal moment in a junior college classroom, and that obviously continued through graduate school. And I'm interested then how you think about the relationship of your disciplinary training in English, your appointment in Africana Studies, and how this mixture of disciplinary training and non-disciplinary appointment in classrooms and communities and colleagues and all of that, how that mixture of disciplinary and non-disciplinary approaches has impacted both how you conceive and then do research projects, and maybe also how it impacts how you construct and practice a classroom.
Okay. So I'll say that all of that for me was and still is always messy. So I
Yeah.
don't know that I've ever had any sort of clear delineating lines and areas of there's this, here's the disciplinary, and here's the interdisciplinary, here's the scholarship, and here's the classroom. It just all gets so enmeshed. But I would say that the reason that is that, as I talked about before, my trajectory in literary studies has, from the inception, been so Black-centered, right? First, primarily in the U.S. was kind of all I knew about. That's what I was looking at. And then I went to a summer program to introduce, Black and brown kids to graduate studies in the humanities. And I took an African literature class, right, for the first time. And so that was fascinating. And I decided, well, that's what I want to do. And that's how I ended up in Madison. But I went into the English department, not the African literature department. So I did a minor in African literature, and then focused on African American literature. And then once I started working on my dissertation, and certainly into my first job, I had moved into early Black Atlantic literature, right? So I was learning even more about the diaspora. So I think it is that, my early trajectory was very disciplinary focused, right? It was literary studies, period, right? In a very PWI setting, especially in grad school, where the work on Black and brown people was almost self-trained, right? There weren't a whole lot of classes. But because I was always looking at everything through a Black lens, right? I got in trouble for that, like in my Chaucer class, where everyone was laughing at me because I talked about a posse, which is exactly what we were talking about. And, in this class about the vernacular, when I used the vernacular, then it wasn't okay.
Yeah.
Chaucer's vernacular was great, but mine was not. But just an example of, I was always looking at it before I even knew what Black studies really was as a field. That's how I learned to do literary studies, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So then when I really understood that the work that I was doing, having to do so much history, I was using a little cultural geography, that I was actually doing very interdisciplinary work. Again, it was all through using Black studies methodologies. So there just was never sort of a clear distinction, right? Between, like, I'm clear that I came through a very specific, defined traditional discipline, but the way that I negotiated and navigated through that discipline was through Black studies. Again, even before I even knew that it was a thing. But that's what kept me going. Like, if I hadn't been able to do that, I'm sure I wouldn't have made it through grad school.
That's, there's so much that's interesting in there. I mean, part of what I've heard in the last two responses is, that there's something about literary history, which is, I know that it's disciplinary and it has its rules and traditions, but it also opens up all these different ways of, necessarily, as you said, you kind of had to teach yourself how to do, historical research, I think is the way you put it, or, sort of engage historical methods. But
Yeah.
also the way Black studies, the way you were talking about, especially there at the end, is like, it's less a training than it is like a sensibility, right?
Mm.
That it's a sensibility that is even there in a Chaucer class, right? But also is opening up all these other ways of cracking breaking open some of the constraints of disciplinary training.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is its own, training, but I didn't get to the formal training until much, much later. And that's when I came to understand, like, oh, okay, this is what I've been trying to do.
Uh-huh.
And then I could, read all these wonderful people, right, who had been doing this work and then bring that into the work that I was doing. And yeah, literary history, I guess, really does open it up because that's how like the religious studies piece came in because that wasn't something that I, intentionally went towards. It was just the woman that I was interested in was a minister.
Uh-huh.
And if I wanted to write about her, I needed to understand what religion or Protestantism, I should say, writ large meant in the 19th century. I had to learn a lot about that.
Mm-hmm.
I had to come to an understanding that, oh, okay, when we're talking about American culture in the 19th century, we can't talk about that without understanding what was happening in religion because those things were, inextricably intertwined.
Yeah.
That it was American culture, particularly for Black folks in the 1800s, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I needed to like train myself to understand what Protestantism looked like, the formations of the first Black churches and how that happened. And then my person was Methodist, so I had to learn all about Methodism and all the things I didn't know, even though I grew up in a Methodist church. I had no idea about what it
That's
even
always
was.
interesting, those moments.
I know. I was like, "Oh, is that what my church was called? Allen Temple. Okay, I get it now." Yeah, so by the time I did all these things, coming to Black studies, right? So I moved from English into Africana studies when I moved to UD was a very purposeful move. I had known years before, it really was when I was trying to work on my book, and it took a while for me to understand that I wasn't presenting to the right audiences. I kept getting feedback that was disheartening on my book proposal. Folks didn't understand what I was doing. It's because I was using all of my, tried and true readers in literary studies and didn't fully understand that by that time my work was too interdisciplinary to present to someone who was very traditional literary studies
Mm-hmm.
and for them to understand my project. And that set me back by years, honestly. And then once I understood that, basically I had a very casual conversation with a historian. She asked me, well, what are you doing? I gave the elevator speech and she like got it like that.
Huh.
She's like, oh, so you're da 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 da. It's like, oh man.
Oh, jeez.
All these years of these literary studies folks saying, I thought it was me, like I'm not articulating what I'm doing properly. It wasn't that. I was just articulating to the wrong audience. So,
Interesting.
yeah, so all of that made me understand that I had outgrown English departments in the traditional sense. Of course, there are wonderful English departments at places, UD being one of them, that are very expansive and doing all the amazing things. And I could be in one of those departments, but I firmly understood that I wanted to be in a Black Studies department by then, and set about looking for, okay, how do I make this move to get out of English into interdisciplinary Black Studies department.
Amazing that it would be in a random conversation with an historian that shifted that. I love that, though. I mean, it's a kind of a theme in this conversation of random encounters being actually changing, and the setback years part is I mean, that's terrifying, but it's but it's also like such an important window into this multidisciplinary, disciplinary, the distinction between what that means. I mean, it's very concrete. It's here as a proposal for a project, and it can only make sense in a particular context and
Absolutely.
not in another. And I'm sorry that you had to live that part of it. So I don't mean to be indifferent towards that, but it is really revealing. If you ever write a memoir, that's a great chapter, actually.
It was all for the good, because ultimately it's a better book. If I had been I was forcing myself to try and get it out earlier because, again, following the traditional timelines of, what scholars should produce and the how and the when. And it's just better, right? So it was better because I had that extra time and to learn more, to do more, to write differently, to think differently about it. It's a very different book than it would have been had I finished it earlier. And coming to Africana Studies was, by the time I did it, I was very clear. I was coming home.
I love that. That's great. Glad it ends up in a home place. And, also, I'm just thinking also about so much of what you were saying in terms of the book research part. It's a reminder, and this comes up in a number of these conversations, reminder for me and for, I think, anybody listening, how, Black Studies is interesting because I often hear from colleagues in disciplines, they get sort of snarky or over talk and have this idea that Black Studies is somehow easier for some fantasy reason, like it's me studies or some of this bullshit. And what's so frustrating is that it's really the opposite, which you just described in that narrative so well, which is, no, actually real Black Studies research requires so much extra work. Precisely because you can't just say, oh, that's outside the scope of a strictly literary study or a strictly philosophical or historical study. All of a sudden, you do need to know about, what is particular about the Methodist Church in relation to Protestantism in America and the 19th century iteration. I mean, you just pile on so many books. I mean, in my mind, I'm seeing an incredible pile of books, and I'm a slow reader, so I get a little anxious and have to remind myself that's not my project right now. But it gives testimony both to the difficulty of Black Studies research in terms of the how much work has to be done, but also the real profundity of the insights that come from a commitment to that. I'm glad you were able to stay committed to that with that book.
Oh, yeah. I love what I do. I mean, not to say it can't be frustrating, right, for all of us at times, but that's the beauty of doing what we do. I love my project. I love thinking through, what comes next, and I even loved going down all the rabbit holes that felt like that's not my project. I don't have time for this right now.
They make great anecdotes in a classroom, in a job or in a professional talk or something. Well, I had two more questions for you. And so both are sort of big speculative or big thinking questions. The first one about the field of Black Studies, and what do you think that the field of Black Studies has done particularly well historically, and what do you think it has not done particularly well?
Well, I think that this field has just done amazing work. It people, myself included, but I'm one tiny ant in the in the thing. We built a field, a whole field
Yeah.
that is now unmatched and undeniable. As worried as everyone is rightfully is about what is happening now in our current moment, Um, I say that, a lot of people talk about, what is happening as well, that, the genie's been let out of the bottle, right? And even if we deal with, the leaders we have now, that something has been uncorked, right, in American culture, and they can't get that cork back on.
Mm.
That is true. In the same way, Black studies has functioned as well in the same way. You can't get rid of us, right? You can wipe out
Mm-hmm.
departments. You cannot wipe out the field, the work that we've done, the curiosities, the intellectual traditions, the methodologies that have been developed. You can try. You can't get rid of that, right? And so, in a very short amount of time, Black studies has really forced the world to reckon with what it means to be Black and brown globally.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in a way that other fields are just different because of what they do and their focus. But just as we were saying, we have a field that is so large and so encompassing that only folks who have absolutely no idea what they're talking about, right? Anybody who's ever read anything in Black studies would immediately understand that this is not easy,
Mm-hmm.
right? That
Yep.
this is serious work and serious scholarship. So it's there. So that's what Black studies has done very well. I think that people understood the assignment from day one and have excelled at the assignment.
Mm-hmm.
Our ongoing challenge, again, because it is still a young field, is that what you were talking about, you touched on earlier, is there's still Black studies in the classroom, Black studies, in the scholarship, does reach out to the Black experience and into community engagement, but not as much as it could and should.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so that's part of our growth trajectory. It's what we are doing more and more for sure. But there's still a lot more work to be done so that at some point there isn't a question of what does it mean to be a Black studies scholar, and how does that relate to the Black experience writ large.
Mm-hmm.
So at some point, we need to be in a place where that's no longer a question.
Yeah. I love that. Maybe an answer to the last question I have, or the beginnings of a response, which is thinking about the future of the field of Black studies, institutional, community, global context. What is the question you would want us to all be asking, or what is the issue you would want us to all be thinking about?
Well, I mean, again, thinking about this is my comments about the current moment. I think our assignment now is to lean into doing what we do best, which is answering the question, how did we get here? I think that's just what we need to be doing. I think we need to be studying and paying attention to and analyzing and putting all of our scholarly energies and efforts into having a very deep and expansive understanding of the history and the political actions that have been, rolling out for decades, even for generations, because we can provide an essential lens and analysis of this current moment in a way that only we do.
Yeah.
And it's what we've been doing, right, for in other aspects. And so I think that we need to be about the business of figuring out our past, as we have been doing, and thinking about it in terms of this current moment. How did we get here? So that we can, moving forward, have a sense of, well, what does the future look like based upon what we know to be true, right, around our past and what led to this. And being in a position to telling and exposing, again, these buried and hidden truths that no one wants to face. It's what we've always done. We need to dig deep and do it deeper and harder and wider this time, and then apply that skill to help us move out of and beyond this moment. Because right now, we're in the trenches, we're in war zone, and it's so easy to just be focused on what's in front of us, right? We almost can't help but do that. We have to be. But we also need to be looking back to say, how do we get here? So that we can figure out how do we move out of this?
I love that. What a fantastic place to wrap up, and a really profound challenge to all of us, because what you're saying draws on our deepest thinking and our skill set, but also requires a lot of courage. Right? And that's I'm always reminded. I always remind myself of the beginnings of this field, that some 19 and 20-year-olds took on everybody who had authority over them to insist that we exist as a field. Surely we can have the courage in this moment. So sometimes the future, the sort of affects and grounding of the future is somewhere in the origin point. So thank you so much for this, Kim. I was really excited about the conversation, and this has just been absolutely fantastic. I appreciate your time, but I really appreciate the seriousness and thoughtfulness of your comments today. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
All right. Have a great rest of your day.
You as well. Take care.